Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Something Creepy in Belarus by Throw CVF. This happened about 17 years ago during my summer break. My friend and I went to visit another friend who was staying in this tiny remote village in Belarus for the summer. The house was his grandparents', and the whole place felt super isolated. Honestly, it was actually a lot of fun at first. We went swimming at a nearby lake every day, and at night we'd stay up late just sitting by the water, listening to the kind of deafening silence you only get in the countryside. And we would talk for hours. During the day, we'd go mushroom picking, explore the area, take pictures, and just make some really good memories together. We stayed for a few weeks, but then one of my friends had to leave early because of some family stuff. The only way out was a bus that came twice a week, and she missed it. So she came back to our friend's place and asked if we could walk her to a nearby highway to try to hitch a ride home. The main road was about 7 miles away, so we all started walking. When we finally got to it, it was midweek and there were no cars passing at all. I guess most people were still at work in the city. And as it got later, we decided to just walk back to the house. On the way back, we passed through a few neighboring villages that were half abandoned. And honestly, it was pretty creepy, but we kept ourselves entertained by singing and joking around to keep the fear at bay. It was getting dark, and we still had about 4 miles left. Then we ended up on this road with dense forest on both sides, and suddenly we started hearing noises coming from the trees. It was pitch dark and honestly pretty unsettling. We tried to joke about it, but deep down we all felt something was off. And then my friend pointed, and we saw 2 huge yellow eyes staring at us from the trees. We just kept walking in silence for a bit until one of us nervously said, "Must be some wild fireflies messing with us." And we all laughed, but we all knew those definitely were not fireflies. Now, keep in mind, this was before cell phones, so no way to call anyone. We just had to keep moving and get back to safety. As we got closer to the village, 2 of us heard a female voice coming from the forest. We looked at each other, both realizing that we had heard it, while the third friend was talking and didn't notice. I got goosebumps. It sounded so real, and the fact that I wasn't the only one to hear it made it even creepier. We didn't say anything until we got back to the house. Now, here's where it gets even weirder. In Slavic folklore, there's not just the Leshy, the forest spirit who protects the woods and sometimes plays tricks on people, but also the Rusalka. Rusalki are the mythological female spirits often connected to lakes and rivers. They're usually described as beautiful women with long hair, sometimes said to lure people, especially at night, with their singing or voices. We'd been hanging out at the lake so many nights, and then to hear a mysterious female voice coming from the trees later on, it definitely made us wonder if we'd gotten a little too close to something supernatural. We still joke about those unhinged fireflies, but deep down we all know we saw and heard something we can't explain. Between the abandoned houses, the glowing eyes in the forest, and that eerie female voice, it was honestly one of the scariest and strangest experiences of my life. And yeah, I still think about those nights at the lake and wonder what might have been watching and listening to us from the darkness. Strange Light in the Forest by Micropenis. I'd like to start by saying that this story isn't mine, but rather something that supposedly happened to a friend of mine whom I've since lost contact with. I'd known her for several years when she told me this story, and it was the only strange or paranormal tale she had, so it's always had this ring of truth with me. Around 2004, she lived with her parents in a wooded area of Ontario, Canada. Their backyard had a handful of fruit trees, and a thick forest began where their backyard ended. One night, her father was climbing the stairs to go to bed when he happened to look out the window towards the fruit trees. A bluish-white light caught his eye, meandering amongst their fruit trees. It wasn't particularly bright, but not dim either. It supposedly drifted freely around, maybe 3 feet off the ground. Thinking it was a prowler with a flashlight, her dad readied himself for confrontation. But as he looked closer, he realized that this light wasn't coming from a flashlight. It was just a ball of light floating around the trees, as my friend described it. Her dad called for the family to come and look at it, and they joined him at the window, bewildered at what this ball of light was. And the dad decided to get a closer look, but as soon as he opened the door, the light retreated to the thicker forest beyond their yard, weaving through the fruit trees as it moved without a sound. Creeped out, my friend and her mom went back upstairs to go to bed, trying to put it out of their minds. Her dad stayed up a bit longer, staring out the window, mesmerized, watching as this light returned to their yard and just floated around. Eventually, it drifted back into the forest and disappeared. The following morning, my friend woke up to her father shouting in a panic. He had gone blind overnight. She and her mom rushed him to the hospital, where the doctor examined him, and the doctor told them that he typically only sees this kind of retinal burn from people welding without a mask. It was determined that her father's blindness was thankfully temporary, and it would pass within a couple of days. I need to add that her father was not a welder, but rather worked in an office. As I mentioned, I've since lost contact with that friend, but as of our last conversation, the source of that light was never determined. Unsettling Camping Experience by Philosopher 512. I've decided to share this story in case anyone has had a similar experience. In the summer of 2023, I was camping with my family in Beaver Creek Campground in Montana for a few nights while visiting Yellowstone. The first night there was the most unsettling experience I have ever had. My mother, stepfather, and his brother had all gone to sleep around midnight while I stayed up for about an hour by the fire. It was pitch black when I decided to snuff out the fire and head to my tent for sleep. And after about 20 minutes of laying there in my tent, I began to hear sniffing noises immediately outside my tent. Fearing it was a bear, I froze. This continued for a while until I heard the familiar breathing and shaking noises of that of a dog. I relaxed, supposing a nearby camper's dog had wandered over. I stopped hearing the dog after a while, but then I heard footsteps walking around our campsite and the sound of a large stick being dragged along the ground all around. I was frozen in fear again at the possibility of a stranger walking around our campsite in pitch darkness. Then suddenly, an obvious camera flash had gone off right in front of my tent. I was still frozen solid with fear. And later, it felt as though an animal or person had laid down and cradled on the corner of my tent. I felt this presence for about 5 minutes and kept feeling as if something was lightly fidgeting with the corners of the tent. I lay there, praying for it to stop, but then I was forced to make this person or whatever acknowledge my awareness of the situation when I sensed another's touch on the zipper of my tent door. I called out loudly, "Who's there?" My stepdad woke up and called out to me while I was too afraid to open my door. 10 seconds passed when I knew he was out of his tent with his gun. and then I emerged. However, there was nothing there, and after I called out, I didn't hear or sense any movement going away from the campsite. All the while, my mom and stepdad had a dog in their tent which reacted to nothing the whole time. I slept in the car the next 2 nights, and nothing else happened. Anyone else had weird encounters like this in Montana near Yellowstone, or in general? Thanks for reading my story. What Was It? By Anonymous. When this happened, a big storm had blown in around 7 a.m. and didn't move off until about 12:30 a.m. It knocked out power to our home sometime around 7 p.m. We had a chicken coop about 40 feet from our house, and it was about 2 feet off the ground and 12 by 20, with an entrance door that used to be the front door to our home. It was around 8:30. The sunset is around 3:30 at that time of the year, when I was shining my flashlight out an upstairs window when I saw a dark silhouette standing in front of our coop. The top of its head was in line with the top of the coop door, and it was very muscular, had broad shoulders, long upper legs with proportionately shorter lower legs. It was too narrow at the hips to be a bear, and we had a black bear in her cub den near our house a few years before, and this was nothing like her shape. I moved the flashlight to try to get a better look at whatever it was, and it disappeared from view. Now, the chicken coop is covered in white siding, and there was no mistake that this thing was bipedal. It was facing me when I first shined the light on it, and then it turned to run off just before I moved the flashlight. Given that an average door is about 7 feet high and the coop is 2 feet off the ground, that would put whatever I saw around 9 feet tall. I should mention what had me looking outside was a sound that I had heard on the wind that alarmed me to my core. I had spent the day listening to the wind howl and moan, but this was different. It was guttural and within the sounds of the wind, but not in sync. It caused a physical reaction. My heart started racing and my stomach went into knots. I was tending 2 of my grandkids that were playing with flashlights and mostly shadow puppets. That's when I jumped to my feet and told them to hand me a flashlight and to turn the other one off. And I shined the flashlight outside through the window, and I had to put it against the window for it to not reflect back. And to see outside the window, all the other lights had to be off. And also, one of our dogs was barking furiously. Before I could tell my daughters what I had seen, they told me what they were experiencing downstairs with the 2 younger children and the dogs. Because the power was out, my youngest daughter had been charging her phone in her car, and she said she'd went out to get her phone off the charger and felt that someone had been watching her. She said the feeling was so intense that she stayed in her car a few minutes to look around and see if she could see anyone. When she got out to head back into the house, she only got a few steps away from her car when she heard the same sound that I had heard. She said she was instantly terrified and ran into the house, and the dog was in the window barking as she was coming through the door. My oldest daughter said that when she had heard the howl, she saw her dog lift her head and look out the window, and then it stood up and started barking frantically. The dog was looking in the opposite direction than my youngest daughter, who had just started to run to the front door. Nobody wanted to charge their phones in the vehicles after that. Now, this was not a mistaken identity about the sounds. We were in 30-mile-an-hour winds with 55-mile-an-hour gusts and a downpour of rain in December. I don't know of any animal, domestic or wild, that would be out in that weather. In the morning, after sunrise, my oldest daughter went out to the trash bin that's next to our chicken coop, and she found the heavy lid had been lifted off the bin and set on the back of the bin, opposite the direction the wind had been blowing. 2 large bags of trash were missing, and there was a trail of trash going into the woods. Now, the critters around our place tear up the trash in the bin and pick out what they want. They've never carried 55-gallon trash bags into the woods with them. There weren't any tracks of any kind because we don't really have any soft mud spots outside, mostly gravel or grasses around the area of our property. So to this day, we still have no idea who that visitor to our property was. We've got a lot of questions and no answers. Something in the Woods Near Cherokee by Overall Flamingo. My husband, a 23-year-old male, and I, a 22-year-old female, had been on our wedding anniversary for over a week. We have a camper in Cherokee, North Carolina that we've been staying in, and we have an interest in abandoned things like towns and cemeteries. We decided that we would go visit Connor Cemetery near Couch's Creek off of Newfoundland Gap Road, which is about 1.9 miles from the Oconaluftee Visitor Center. When we arrived, we pulled off close to where the trailhead is supposed to be. We got out and started walking towards the opening in the woods where there was a trail. The trail itself is visible, but you have to be looking for it. We were walking towards where the cemetery was supposed to be, and I was in the front, looking down, checking for snakes and holes, and my husband was behind me. We paused for a second, and he said, "Babe, look at that statue." I started looking around and asked him where, and he pointed out the direction. What I was expecting was like an angel statue that you would normally see in cemeteries, but that's not what this was. I looked up the trail, and off to the side was what looked to be a 12 to 15 foot tall deer or elk statue. It looked like it was either made up of wood or wrapped in leather hide, and it looked preserved. The problem we had was that nowhere online was this mentioned, or anything of that sort. It started giving me this uneasy feeling because it had a strange face, and it was just a very weird place for something like that to be. My husband then said that he didn't like it at all and that we should go. As soon as he said that, we turned around and left that area as fast as possible. And once we got back to our car, I told him that I didn't feel right at all out there. He agreed with me and said that he saw a deer-like face with no snout, and he thought that it had blinked, and he thought he saw its right ear move, but not like a normal animal. Its ear moved in like a 360-degree rotation. I told him what I saw was like an elk body with a camel mixed with an elk-like face. And on the way back to our camper, I started thinking that I should have taken a picture of it, but unfortunately I didn't think to at the time. Once we were back at the camper, we started researching things and couldn't find where this was ever listed or if anyone had ever seen it before. And it seemed no one had ever posted about seeing it before. We decided to go to a local Native American bookstore that we had gone to previously and speak to the older lady who ran it. We explained what we had seen, and she advised us to speak to the visitor center in the national park to see if anyone had something similar or if they knew of any other Native stories. She did mention to us that sometimes there are things that choose for you to be the only ones to see them. We thanked the lady and went back to our camper. And now I'm here typing this out and trying to figure out what we saw out there in the middle of those woods. If anyone out there has any info on what this could have been, let me know. We plan on going to the visitor center later, and most likely we'll be going back into the woods to see if it is still there or not. The Voice in the Woods by Santa Claus 1972. When I was a kid, our family lived in Bandon out on Seven Devils Road. At that time, and I don't know if this still holds true or not because I haven't been there in 20 years, there were lots of wooded areas. And this was the 80s, so I pretty much did whatever I wanted during the summer. I would pack a backpack with jerky and a sandwich or two and go out and play in the woods until dark. I was big into Rambo at the time, so I had my survival knife, a BB gun, a canteen, and camouflage. I would spend all day digging hidey holes and covering them so I could pop into them and cover with the lid I had made and hide out. I thought it was pretty awesome. So one day near the end of summer, I heard my mom call out when I was out there in the woods, which was weird because our house was the opposite direction from where the call came. So I hollered back at her and she said, my name, I'm over here. So I went towards the sound of her voice. This happened a few more times and I kept following. But at that point, I was getting a little freaked out because there was no reason for my mom to be out there that far in the woods. In fact, she hated the woods, so she never stepped foot into them. So I turned around and started going back the way I came. And then she called out again. But this time, her voice was really angry, and it scared me silly, so I took off running. I heard her call my name a few more times as I was bolting back towards home. I was getting really tired from the pushing through the bushes and undergrowth, and it sounded like whoever it was getting closer. And finally, I made it back to the area I was really familiar with, and I needed a breather. So I hopped into one of my hidey holes and covered up and sat really quiet. About a minute later, the steps got much louder. Whoever was behind me was really close. They weren't talking anymore, though. I could see a little from my hole that I was hidden in, though I was watching. And sure enough, I saw someone in a pair of boots and blue jeans pass by. Whoever it was that passed by, I stayed put for what felt like forever. And when I felt like it was safe, I covered my hidey hole back up and then bolted to my house. My dad had just gotten home, and I told him what had happened, and being the 80s, he told me if I was lying, he was going to whoop me silly, and then had me take him out to where I was. Sure enough, there were boot prints where I had been hidden, and whoever had made the prints had doubled back and went back into the woods. My dad called a few buddies of his, and they followed the tracks for a while, but they lost the trail pretty soon. My brother and I weren't allowed to go into the woods anymore after that, and we moved soon after. The person following me isn't what freaked me out. What freaked me out was whoever was calling to me sounded just like my mom. And what freaks me out even more than that, whoever was calling me somehow knew my name. My Experiences by Clay26262. Two strange experiences come to my mind about being out in the woods. The first happened when I was around 15 and was squirrel hunting in early October. It was a pretty cool day, and I was walking along in a hollow I'd hunted a few days prior and had seen quite a few squirrels there. As I walked deeper into the hollow, I started seeing more and more squirrels and bagged a couple. As I was watching a couple move around in the trees, waiting for one to stop on an open branch so I could take a shot, I was totally focused on the two little animals jumping around and not paying much mind to anything else. Well, all of a sudden, the squirrels, 6 or 7 I'd counted in the immediate vicinity, just disappeared. Now, that was weird enough in and of itself, since all these squirrels collectively made alarm barks and then were silent and nowhere to be seen. But what happened in the coming minutes has stayed with me for many years. I stood up, looking around for any of the squirrels I'd been watching, and then started hearing a loud crashing noise in a gully off to my right. As I stood there, I saw a figure emerge from the trees, and the figure was walking on 2 legs and had a rather large frame. And at first I thought it may have been my father when I saw it as he was hunting with me that day. But then I realized it was far too tall and not wearing any visible hat. I looked for a good while at the form standing at the base of the ridge I was halfway up on the side of, and continued thinking that whatever I was seeing had to be a human, based on some of the behaviors it was exhibiting. At first, it was looking around like a lost person would, slowly scanning for a trail marking or some sign of where it was. And second, it remained on its hind legs and appeared far too comfortable on them, not even showing any difficulties as it made its way down the side of the ridge, unlike any bear I'd ever seen. And lastly, its form was, well, far too human for it not to be a very large man. I began to wonder if the person was lost, so I called out, "Hello?" And it responded by sinking down and looking around quickly as though looking for a place to hide. I called out again, and this time it zeroed in on my position, looking directly at me. I took a step toward it, and it bolted on 2 feet, faster than I have ever seen anything run before or since. It was such a graceful movement, too, which made it somewhat chilling. I mean, how easily this large figure ran up and over the ridge at my 2 o'clock position. It made me fear that this thing, whatever it was, could easily chase me down and kill me if it wanted to. I quickly left the area and have only returned once since, that time during deer season and without my knowledge of where we'd end up. The second experience occurred to me when I was walking my dog out in the fields near my home. We both heard a bellowing roar from something I can't identify to this day. The closest thing I can come to is if you mixed a bear, a wolf, and a tiger. It was such a terrifying sound that my dog immediately went to his house in my yard and stayed there the rest of the night. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like me to narrate, email it to unclejosh.truescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. If you like what you've heard here and you're catching this on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't, and maybe even tell a friend about it. I'd appreciate it. You can follow me on social media, there's links to that in the description. And if you'd like to take your support of what I'm doing a step further, find the link to my Patreon page, and maybe even consider getting some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is in the description too. Everybody, thanks for sticking with me through this crazy time, and I do have good news on a medical front. I finally, after a year, got approved for a medicine that my docs want me to be on. So, very happy about that, and can't wait to get back to hitting on all 8. Super, super cool. Thanks for your support. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.